Hi guys, as many videos on YouTube have pointed out to you, Sony has released the fantastic new FX30. This is an APS-C style sensor with a ton of great video specs, and that is $1,800. But a lot of people in my comment section have been asking about the A7C. Now this is another fantastic camera from Sony, a full frame camera that costs $1,800. Since they're both the same price, which one should you get? Let's talk about it. Now, I have used the A7C extensively. I have compared it to my little Dougie, my little ZV-E10. I have the A7 IV over here. I also own the A7 III. I have a lot of Sony cameras, and I do have the FX30 coming. I have pre-ordered it. It is on its way. I'm going to test it against all of my cameras, and here's what I'm going to say to you. I think that the A7C is a very underrated camera. A lot of people realize how great it is, but a lot of people don't. It is, however, very different than the FX30. It does have some similarities. It's a Sony camera with great 4K that is downsampled from 6K, just like the FX30. It has a fully articulating screen, the flip-out screen, like the FX30. It has the ability to record the gyroscopic data, so you can run that through Catalyst Browse and have fantastic gimbal-like image stabilization. It has unlimited recording in video in all modes, and there are no overheating issues, just like the FX30. But there are plenty of differences, and hopefully this video will let you figure out which camera is better suited for you. If either, well, one of them should be, because they're both fantastic. Just get them both. So let's talk about the advantages the FX30 has over the A7C, and these are all basically going to be in the video realm. That is where it has its advantages. It does have a 26 megapixel sensor compared to a 24 megapixel sensor of the A7C, but it's an APS-C sensor compared to full frame, so I'm not going to consider those 2 extra pixels to be an advantage for the FX30. But what is a major advantage is 2 card slots on the FX30. So, and they're both CF Express card slots that can also take SD cards. I love that implementation by Sony. So you can have redundant recording. If you're somewhere where you can't lose the footage, you definitely need to be writing it to both cards. So for professional work, you know, you're probably gonna want the 2 card slots. You don't want to miss at the zoo. The whale is giving birth there in the cage. I mean, you got to capture that. Where I'm from, they put whales in zoo cages. 10-bit recording. This is a big deal for a lot of people, myself included. I love to use 10-bit recording, especially if I'm doing fancier stuff. If I'm doing my interviews, documentaries, I'm always going to be shooting in 10-bit 422, and the FX30 has that, like my A7 IV. The FX30 has 10-bit 422, so great for color grade. It also has 10-bit 422 in 4K 60 at a very minimal crop, a 1.04 times crop. You can barely notice it. So that a 4K 60 10-bit 422, the A7C does not have 4K 60 in any capacity. And it continues. The 4K goes to 120 on the FX30. Now that is at a 1.6 times crop, so it can do a 1-to-1 pixel readout. It crops way in on the sensor, but it'll still be very sharp footage, very high resolution, and it will be good with rolling shutter. That's another thing. The rolling shutter is better on the FX30 compared to the A7C. The A7C's rolling shutter is not great. The FX30's is not perfect, but it is better than the A7C. You're doing a lot of whips and pans, or you're filming race cars going by, the FX30 is going to be better for you. Stabilization, they both have 5-axis in-body stabilization, but the A7C's stabilization is not great. Like my A7 III, even though it says it's 5-axis, is not all 5-axis stabilization is created equally, and the A7C's is not great. Now on my A7 IV, the stabilization, especially the active stabilization, when you put that on, it is quite good. I can use that when I'm out vlogging my gorgeous face, and the FX30 will have that same type of stabilization, so it's definitely going to be better for handheld video footage. 16-bit raw output. The FX30 through HDMI, you record to a little Ninja 5 that I have up here, you can get 16-bit raw footage, and that is going to be an absolute deal maker, not a breaker, a maker for a lot of the production companies that want to buy, you know, a camera for some real deal productions, to be able to get 16-bit raw footage in an $1,800 camera blows the mind. Full-size HDMI port, which is very great. I love having a full-size HDMI port on the A7 IV and my GH5. Before that, having a micro HDMI port over here, like on my little ZV-E10, it is not fantastic. It's very fiddly, and those cords break pretty easily. So A7C only has the micro HDMI port. You can load custom LUTs onto your FX30. So if you use a Leeming LUT like I do, you can look at it right on the screen there, and which is fantastic to be able to load a custom LUT right on the LCD. Speaking of the LCD is actually a better resolution than the A7C. So your exposure, everything you're looking at on your little LCD screen will be better on the FX30, and the Sony screens are finally starting to get a little bit better in their cameras, and ones like on the A7C or my A7 III, they're just not great. The FX30 has fancy codecs like all-eye codecs, and that is very important for a lot of filmmakers. It has S-Cinetone. The A7C doesn't have S-Cinetone. I personally don't like using S-Cinetone, but a lot of people do. It's on the cinema line, and people really like it that they're able to match up S-Cinetone with other cameras. Minimal color grading that you need to do in post. You can just use S-Cinetone. So it's on the FX30, not on the A7C. Focus breathing compensation. That is a big one for me because some of the Sony lenses, some of the good Sony lenses, like right now I'm using the 24mm f1.4. This actually has a fair amount of focus breathing, but I'm using the A7 IV, so it has focus breathing compensation. So when I move in or out, the screen, it doesn't breathe. You don't see the field of view changing at all, which is fantastic. The FX30 has that. That is so great for video, the focus breathing compensation. It also has focus mapping. That is a new way to see your focus, which some people don't like, but I actually do. It looks a little messy at first, but you get used to it, and it's easy to tell exactly what is in focus with the focus mapping. It has the new updated Sony menu system, and it has the Sony Cine EI menu, which a lot of people prefer when they're using cinema rigs. So that is much better than the A7C's old clunky Sony menu where the touchscreen doesn't work in the menu and it's a little bit confusing. I am used to it. On my ZV-E10, I fly through that menu because I'm used to it by now, but you know, it isn't great. The FX30 has a dual base ISO system. At S-Log3, it's ISO 800 and 2500, so it's great. You can bump up your ISO a little bit and have the same amount of noise at 800 base level and also 2500. Now, a lot of people say all the Sony cameras have a dual base ISO of some kind, but officially the A7C does not. So the FX30, though, has an official dual base ISO. The FX30 ergonomics are also better in terms of video because it's got a nicer grip, first of all, but the button layout is not only better, but it is video centric. You have things like zebra and peaking right there on the wheel. So if you're a video shooter, which you probably are, if you're buying the FX30, it's laid out much better like their cinema line as opposed to a photo camera. It also has all those mounting points, those 1/4-inch threads that are all over the body, so it's easier to mount a lot of things to the camera instead of having to put it in a cage and rig it up that way. Can keep your rig a little bit smaller and have a few accessories. And speaking of accessories, there's an optional handle which is an XLR handle, so you can just feed your XLR mic like my NTG3 shotgun mic I'm using right now. Instead of going into an H4n and syncing it up later, I could run that right in to the FX30 if I bought that handle that comes separately. And there's another thing you can buy separately, that is time code in. You can get an adapter cable to put time code into the FX30, and for a lot of video productions, that is essential. And now we'll go over the A7C's advantages, and while it might not look like it has many over the FX30, the ones it has are pretty big advantages, like a bigger sensor. It has a full-frame sensor as opposed to the APS-C sensor, which means it's going to have a little better dynamic range, and it's also going to be better in low light. And full-frame sensors, they have a look, you know, there's a little more magic to them in many people's opinions. Now, for me, for video, I use Micro Four Thirds, I use APS-C sensors, I use full-frame. And honestly, I could use either. Many Hollywood films have been shot on APS-C size sensors, so there's no need to think sensor size is the be-all, end-all, but it does have an effect, and it has a certain look, and especially when it comes to photos. If you really want that wow factor, your photos to pop, and you have a Sony 50mm 1.2, that is going to look absolutely fantastic on the A7C. So if you want to take a picture and you want the creamiest background possible, or even in video, if you want the creamiest background possible and you want to use autofocus lenses, you're going to have to go with the full frame option. And because it's full frame, you can actually also shoot in an APS-C mode on the A7C. You can take any APS-C crop lens, stick it on the A7C, and it will just go into APS-C crop mode. So you can effectively get 2 focal lengths out of every lens that you are using. So right now I'm using 24mm G Master 1.4. I can get the equivalent field of view of a 36mm lens, basically, if I go into crop mode on my A7 IV. So that can be extremely helpful for people. I actually do that all the time. A really big one is the 2.36 million dot EVF. And while that's not the best EVF in the world, it's an EVF, the electronic viewfinder, the thing you look through when you're taking photos or videos. If it's, you know, nice sunny day and you can't look at the screen, you look through the electronic viewfinder. And the FX30 has no electronic viewfinder at all. Mechanical shutter. The A7C can do 10 frames per second in mechanical shutter. The A7C has no mechanical shutter, and that's a big problem if you are someone who wants to take photographs, because in terms of rolling shutter, even though the FX30 is good, electronic shutter is not always going to cut it when you have really fast moving things. So you really, a mechanical shutter is definitely advantageous for a camera when you want to take photos. So the A7C has one and the FX30 does not. So obviously the FX30 has a butt-ton of advantages when it comes to video, but you have to ask yourself, what are you shooting? Do you need those fancy video features? And if you're trying to get into professional work, I would say absolutely you do. If you want to become someone who shoots professionally in video, then the FX30, I think, is the smarter choice. But let's say you're a YouTuber, or you're doing online content, or you're somebody who needs a photo camera to go along with their video camera, and you don't need the 2 card slots. It's possible if a card corrupts that you will be okay. You don't need that 10-bit footage. You're not outputting anything in RAW. The A7C is probably the best value hybrid camera that you can buy. In terms of like $1,800, for under $2,000, you get a camera that focuses that well and is so great with photos and video. I mean, is still a very compelling option for a lot of people, as long as you don't need those other things the FX30 provides. In order to get something a little bit better than the A7C, you got to step up to this, the A7 IV, and that is substantially more money. That is $700 more than the A7C. So if you're out there looking at the A7C, you may be looking at the right camera. You just have to decide what are your needs. So anyway, thanks for watching. You guys have been watching my FX30 videos, and I appreciate that. And if you keep watching them, I'm going to keep making them. Stay tuned, subscribe, do all that stuff, because I am getting that bad boy in here, and we will test them out, and we'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.